Welcome to the Clean Library Podcast, where content meets conscience. We believe there are millions of you readers out there desperately searching for a better way to find clean content. Each episode, we will introduce you to a new author of clean books, giving you, your family, and your friends clean options.
Hi, I'm Marcus Williams, and I'm with my co-host Brock Morris, and today we have special guest Renée Harvey. Renée is a storyteller and author in Illinois. She graduated from Brigham Young University, Idaho, with a bachelor's degree in history, which has only fueled her personal interest in uncovering stories, historical, familial, and fantastical. Combining those passions in writing, she now primarily tells the tales of little-known people who live in little-known places, as everyone has the ability to choose for themselves the good they will contribute to the world. Welcome, Renée. We're glad to have you on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So before we jump in and get to know you, we need to do your two truths and a lie. So last week, I actually had the opportunity to do an interview myself so that I could catch up with Brock, and I failed. So I'm still behind. So today, my goal is to tie it up. So we're going to read those out, and then we'll try to figure out which one is the lie at the end. So we may try to throw some questions in there and trip you up a little bit. So number one, I wrote a story as a teen that became the basis for how I run my homeschool. Number two, I write thrillers under the pen name Ren Harding. And number three, I've had to change character names because my husband and I picked the same names for our babies. So, story as a teen, basis for homeschool, thrillers under a pen name, or had to change a character name because it became your actual child's name. All right.
Pretty strong. All right. We'll see if we can figure it out.
Let's see if you can do this one. All right. So, Renée, why don't you graduated in history. How did you decide you wanted to start writing books and become an author?
I actually had no idea that this is what I wanted to do with myself. I started college thinking I would go into some kind of art, maybe photography, maybe I'd do some foreign language, maybe education, ended up settling on history through a lot of changes and things. But I didn't actually start writing until after, like for real writing, until after my fourth child was born. And it's just kind of been this hobby and passion and focus that I've had kind of since then, that I've been able to use my education in order to continue this thing that I do.
So how did that first book start? Like, what drove you to sit down and actually start writing?
The very first book, or the first book that I've published?
Well, either.
Okay.
Whichever one you want to talk about. Sometimes people don't want to talk about that first book because it's the practice book. But if that's
right.
Whichever
well,
one.
And I've been writing stories since I was a little kid. I remember my mom had a book in her storage unit that I had written, and it was every single color of the rainbow. And I just colored the entire page, labeled it red, colored it, labeled it orange, and it was this entire book that I had put together. I don't even remember doing it, but that's something that I had done. I distinctly remember writing a story in second or third grade. I remember sitting at my desk and the notebook in hand and drawing the pictures and everything for a story about a unicorn family. And that was when I was a super little kid. The stories that I really started taking off with, the original ones that I really wanted to continue writing, really started coming out of the end of high school. I think the series that I like best at the moment actually started when I went on a trip to Spain and France with my school. And I got to visit the castles that are in France and things. They were gorgeous and beautiful. And it felt like they could be real, and they were real. And the people that were in them, and all of these different, stories that could be told within those castle walls. And I started writing the story on the plane ride home from that trip. And that ended up becoming then the first book that I published.
Cool. So it was inspired by real places?
Right. Yeah. A lot of my inspiration comes from real life things that I come across. Places, people, situations.
Are those castles the same castles that are in your book, or just kind of based on that, what you saw?
One of them, well, both of them are based on it. The stories are, but the actual castle that's based in the stories is actually in a little itty bitty place called Rochegood, France. And it's actually there. It's this
Hmm.
whole resort castle now. And the castle that you see when you go and look it up is kind of a Renaissance style, but the story that I wrote is
Okay,
medieval. So it's even older than the castle that's there.
cool. I think it's in France. I'd love to go visit one day. There's someone building a castle using all of the old tools and old
Yeah.
techniques. Have you heard of
Yeah.
that?
I've heard of stories like
Did you
that.
get to go
I
visit
didn't
it?
get to do that. No, I went to the popular tourist traps.
Ah, okay. That just sounds amazing. Like, and obviously it's taking
Oh,
years,
years.
because that's
Oh, yeah.
it took years originally, and they're doing it all authentic. Everything
Hmm.
from tools to the clothes, materials is all authentic.
Yeah.
So I'd love to go see that. You just reminded me of that. That's kind
Oh,
of
yeah.
cool. So um, when you started writing this book and building the story and stuff, was your original intention to publish it, or was this just for yourself?
Originally,
How did that
very,
work?
very first writing the story and things, it was originally for me. It was something fun. I had this idea, I had this story, I had these characters that I wanted to play with, and I wanted to write it down. It wasn't the first time I had done it. I'd been doing stories before. The idea of putting the
Yeah.
story to paper was nothing new. Sharing it with my friends, that was nothing new. I shared it with, the teacher that was there, and, he was supportive of it and things. And it wasn't until much later that I actually started seeing it as a for real, yeah, I could even do this potentially professionally and have fun with
Yeah.
it.
So are you self-published or traditionally
I
published?
looked into the traditional publishing, but I'm actually self-published.
Okay. And was there something that drove you in that direction specifically, or that's just kind of how it ended up?
Mm, I did originally want to go traditional because that's what every big author does. They send their manuscript
Right.
to a house and whatnot. They get the professional editing, they get the professional covers, they get the different help with that. But nobody wants to read what I write. At least nobody in any kind of traditional publishing house does. And I don't.
Yeah, I was gonna say, don't say that.
And I don't want to change my writing to please what they want to sell.
Yeah,
So
gotcha.
so
Yeah,
traditional for
and
me, or not traditional, self-published for me makes more sense in order to tell the stories that I want to tell.
and do you think that that's the the way of the future,
Mm,
or do you think traditional publishing will always be around?
I don't know. I think there's a lot of good that traditional publishing still does, because me as a self-published author, um, in order for people to reach my work, I have to physically go talk to those people myself and hand them a book and convince
Hmm.
them to buy the book and to read the book and things. Whereas books that appear in things like Barnes and Noble, because they've come through the big houses, well, everybody goes to Barnes and Noble. If Barnes and Noble has the books that I've wanted in the past, of course they will continue to have books I want. So it's just a matter of browsing the shelves. So I think that there will always be a place for traditional works, but it'll be fun to
Hmm.
see what happens with self-published books and how that balance changes.
Yeah, it seems like self-publishing is gaining more
Hmm.
respect. I guess it's a good way to say
Yep.
it, based on, when it first started, it was kind of the Wild West of
Yes.
just, you know, it's getting to be a little more, not regulated, but almost like there's a quality expectation now
Hmm.
if you really want to do a good job
Yep.
self-publishing, and people who want to succeed follow those kind of guidelines or rules so that they can stand out.
Yes.
So you said go and talk to people and stuff. So do you do fairs or markets, or how do you market your
That's
book?
one of the things I want to do. And actually it's been interesting for me as a writer and as an author, because a lot of times when you meet authors, they publish the book, they market the book like crazy. They start working on the second book right away and all this stuff, and they keep pushing their books because they want to get the sales. They're watching the Amazon ratings and reviews, and they're doing all those kinds of things. And I knew that wasn't for me, because I mean, like I said, I
Hmm.
started writing, like for real writing, after my fourth child. Now I have 8 children. And so doing all the marketing and all the business stuff hasn't been a super big thing for me. This interview here is one of the first real opportunities that I've had to actually talk about my stuff, which is great. But for me,
Yeah.
it's that I know the process is going to go slowly. And so for me right now, while I do have my books available and I do have my stories available and I'm making these connections, my focus has been on writing the stories. And then as I do get better into a space where I can do the marketing, well, then I'm going to research it and I'm going to do the Amazon ads and I'm going to do all
Yeah.
the Facebook ads. I'm going to be going to different writers' conferences and things. And that'll be the way that I do that.
But at the moment, you don't like, you're not in a position where you have to sell your books or the dream's over.
Exactly.
Like you have the time and the patience to work and build your library of books and start building your audience.
Exactly. And one of the things that I've been hearing from other well-known professional authors is they don't even really start noticing sales until after their 7th or 8th or 10th book. At which point, what am I doing trying to peddle my one little measly short story type of thing? Not trying to knock anybody who does that
Right.
because there is value in it. Getting those
Yeah.
early mistakes out of the way,
Sure.
totally fine.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting. I mean, I was kind of the same way where I started with one and I didn't even see it as a series until I realized that. It's like, it's not until you get to like book 4, book 5 of the series and that people actually start reading it
Exactly.
and want to go back and, build that fan base. And I think the important thing is that when you find those people, when you find the person who likes what you write, they want more of it now.
Exactly.
So if you already have a volume of work, they can go and they can go and consume all of that
Exactly.
as and binge it
Yes.
almost, Yeah. Because I mean, I do the same thing. When I discover a new author, I then binge all of their
Exactly.
books.
Or when I come
Yeah.
across an author that I want to read all their stuff, but their story isn't even done, it's a little bit discouraging sometimes. So
Yeah. And that wait is hard. You mentioned earlier in your bio form that you've had some questions on can I say my book is clean or not because of just some of the content, and you want to dive into that a little bit. What is that?
sure. So
What are the questions that you've had?
got the questions about what makes a book clean. And for me, I've got very specific, things as to what makes a book clean. It can't have crude words, like even shut up is too strong for me.
Okay.
And things like extreme violence, like if a sword fight is going to go on for page after page after page, I'm not interested. It's too much. Or attitudes, even if a main character's got a nasty attitude, I don't want to read it. I don't want to consume it. So I've got these ideas of what I consider to be clean. And yet I find that there are situations that come up in life and in storytelling that aren't necessarily clean. And so when it comes to the work that I've written, I mean, I've talked about the Rochegood books, which are completely medieval. And medieval life is not clean, and it's not,
Right.
And so it's got the sword fights and it's got the arguments and it's got the, the insults being thrown at things. And how much of that then do I include in the story because it's expected of the genre, or how much do I include of it because it's what the character development needs? And then where do I stop in order for it to still be considered clean? And it's one of these things that I think is very interesting as a reader, because you can have a scene, we can take a sword fight, where you've got the characters battling and dueling and all this kind of stuff, and one person will read it and they'll notice the technique or the swordsmanship or the emotions and whatnot that are driving it. They won't see all of the violence that's happening. And so they'll come out of it saying, whoa, that was amazing and that was incredible, and I know exactly where this is heading, and it's great. But then you take somebody else who reads it, they don't see the emotion. They do see the emotion, but they see the negative of it, and they see the violence going into it. And that same exact scene is horrifying, and it's not clean. And so that's kind of where I've struggled with my own writing. Is I have readers, my beta group and other good friends who have read these books, and they say, oh yeah, absolutely, it is clean. There is nothing in these books that should be offensive to anybody. And I'm sitting on the other side as the author going, it's not a clean scene. Because it took so much, because I read it so differently. So
Right. That's very interesting. Do you feel like you have to, when someone asks you, like, "Hey, is this, is your book okay for my kid?" Do you feel like you have to give a caveat then when explaining, or that's uncomfortable question to me
mhm.
because I'm like, I don't know what your standards are.
Right.
Like, I yes, I would let my teenager read it, but I don't know what you let your kid read.
Right.
That's
Yeah,
hard.
it is one of those things where I think if somebody were to ask me, is it okay for my teenager to read? I could confidently enough say, yes, it should be fine. Because I know my kids have started picking them up, and I know other teens have started picking them up as well. It's at that point, it's
Hmm.
more the language and the development is aimed more toward an adult audience. An adult, not in that
Yeah.
it's got adult content, but it's adult conversations. So
Right. Yeah. And sometimes I'll just say, well, what kind of book does your teen like to
mm,
read? And then I'll get an idea of,
yeah,
what their standards are, and then be like, oh yeah, you're fine
right, yeah, that's a
or
good way to do it.
maybe, but it does have some violence in it, and it sounds like that's not what,
Hmm.
so I try to gauge a little bit that way because it's just so I don't want to be the guy who recommends a book and then they're horrified.
Exactly. Yeah.
you know, that I recommended it. Like, how could he? I trusted him.
Right. That happens so often, I feel. Or there's that one scene that, yeah, when I was reading it, it was bad, but I forgot about it because the rest of the story was good.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's embarrassing when they come back and they say, there's so much that scene in there.
Hmm.
And I totally forgot
Yeah.
about it.
Like, oh, yeah, that
Yeah.
was there. I just skipped it.
Yeah. That's the worst.
Hmm.
So how did you? It was interesting listening to you sort of go through the process of what you personally like as a reader, and then also realizing as a writer that maybe the story or character development required a little bit of a additional maybe input from the content standpoint. How did you sort of resolve that disparity in what you were feeling and what you settled on in your books?
Mm. So there's a couple of different points for that. One is I have to trust my beta group because they're an amazing, intelligent group of people who I've trusted with my work. And I really value their feedback. And when they say that, yeah, this scene, even though you hate it, you can't just delete it. Because if you do, the
Mhm.
rest of everything else doesn't make sense. The character development, the plot, the everything falls because of this one scene that I don't like. Two, I have noticed that there's a lot of books that as I go back and read them again, because I do that, I read books over and over again, there's just scenes I skip.
Mhm.
And it could be my absolute favorite author. And I just don't want to read that scene right now. I know what happens. I can just move on. And so I've kind of moved on, progressed with the stories that I write in that way, knowing that it's probably going to be skipped in future readings from people. It's probably going to be something that they're going to cringe and they're going to back up a little bit, at least if they're me. Others, no problem at all. So I think that's just one of those things that for me, I know it's not going to be one of those highlights of the story. It's not going to be the one that everybody talks about, and I'm totally fine with that. It is there because it is needed for some reason.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And even when there's a difficult scene, there are things that have to happen
mhm.
for your plot to work, and it's a matter of how you write it, how much time you spend on it, how graphic
Exactly.
how graphic you make it, and that kind of thing. And um, when I help authors with developmental edits or content evaluations, that's one of the questions I'm always asking. Does this drive the plot? Does this need to be here?
Yep.
And if it doesn't, why is it here? You know, I did a beta read for a short story, and that was he had added some adult
Mhm.
content. He had some sexual content in there, and he had some language. And my feedback was, you have a great thriller short story, but why is this here? Like, unless you can give me a good reason why this had to be here, you just basically erased a big chunk of audience who don't want that
Mhm.
for no reason.
Yeah.
You know.
And that's a big part of why we're doing this, is just exploring this whole concept of clean,
Yep.
and trying to strip away any sense of shame around writing clean, or writing things that might be considered not clean, or evolving as an author and including some or not. I mean, that's really much of what we want to discuss. We just want
Mhm.
to have the conversations around it. It's not a judgment based on either side of where you might fall, right?
Nope.
And to your point earlier, you might evolve as an author where you include some more content, especially as you sort of described, right? Of having something that adds to the development of a character, but may not cross PG lines or something like that,
Mhm.
right?
So is your series more, is it more fantasy lines in the medieval times, or is it more of a historical
So
fiction?
it is historical fiction, but it does focus more on
Mhm.
the fiction. Real place, real culture, fake people.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay, cool. Whenever I think of medieval historical fiction, I think of the Kingsbridge series, Ken
Okay.
Follett
Yeah.
and Pillars of the Earth and
Uh-huh.
stuff. But he tends to have he doesn't, it's not a ton, but he tends to have the more explicit content of that medieval
Right.
life that he tends to add. And sometimes his books are so big and the stories are so involved. It's like, really, you know, you could have skipped this one page
Right.
out of 1,000 and been okay.
Yes.
but great stories anyway. Do you, is this series, how many, well, first of all, how many are in the series
So the
already?
Roche Good book is a 6-book series. It's all completely out and available on Amazon, and it's done start
Okay,
to finish. Mhm.
awesome. So you finished it. You feel like your characters are done. They're not yelling at you to write another book
I am
for
so
them.
done with this series. It got to a point where once I realized I was writing more than one book, because of course this is the book that I started coming out of high school and on the plane ride home type of thing. It started in one
Yeah,
direction, changed into a very different direction, and I realized I was writing a much bigger story than just one book. And the fun part about
yeah,
it is then as my own experiences grew and developed and things, and of course as well I've got the religious the line as well, and it was a great way to include story sorry, tripping over my words here, but it became a
you're
great
fine.
way to then pull in things like my love of family history and of genealogy, because I'm going to take a guess, most of us, if not all of us who are Caucasian, have medieval ancestry. So it's not, for me, it's not just the castles and it's not just the princesses and it's not just the knights in shining armor. It's, these are my ancestors. And
Yeah.
so the fun part about writing this Rochegood series is the first 5 books are totally medieval, set right in the middle of France, right in the middle of Italy. And yeah, I've got another book that takes place in
Hmm.
Ireland in the same series, and it's so much fun. But then book 6, I get to work with contemporary times and in modern times and be able
Oh,
to
okay.
pull the generations together. And it was so much fun to write.
Cool. That's cool. So are there any family members from your own family history that are kind of woven into your characters?
Names, yes, but I do not have any family history that goes to that particular point in the world.
I was going to be impressed. That's pretty far
Mm-hmm.
back too. Is it
Yeah,
1200s
this
is
is
about when your
1200s.
books are? Is that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. That would be a big family tree if you could go back that far.
I know
That would
there
be
are some
amazing.
people who are close, and it's so neat to get
It,
back there and to see the records and to see the
yeah.
lives that were being lived. It's so neat. I'm going to
Yeah.
geek out a little bit.
Yeah. That's cool. Um, so when I'm naming characters, one of the things that I do is I go look at my family tree. Like that's one of my first resources in naming
Mm-hmm.
characters, and um, I love it because I sometimes I go down rabbit holes about that person, that relative, um, but there's a connection to the characters when they're named after an ancestor.
Yeah.
I, for me, and so I've had people on Facebook groups or whatever who ask, how do you name your characters? And that's always my first answer is I go to my family tree and I go through it until that person calls out to me and says, I want you to name a character after me.
That is so neat.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool experience. And then, like some of them, I have a series where it's a Scottish ancestor, and she actually, her parents and her immigrated to the United States and crossed the plains to Utah, and so been to her dad's grave, and I'm like, this is the dad of one of the, and I didn't follow her real story, but it was a fictional story, but her name.
Yes.
And I'm like, I'm standing here at his gravesite, and it's just, I don't know. To me, that's cool. It's inspiring as an author
Mhm.
when you have like that purpose behind your writing
Yes.
and your characters. Yeah. So have you gotten into audiobooks at all with these, or
I wish.
thought
I
about it?
wish, because a lot of people that I know would be within my realm of readership, they only have access to audiobooks. And so it's something that I am looking
Hmm.
into. It's the lack of time and technology to be able to actually pull it off. But it's
Yeah.
one of those things that I'm researching, like marketing. It's going to be something that I delve
Yeah.
into. So,
So is it something you want to do yourself? You want to narrate your own books?
um, well, it's either that or pay a bunch of actors to do it, which I could do someday. But I've
Yeah.
noticed a trend actually that there's a lot of books that I really enjoy listening to. They're read by the author who wrote it, which
Hmm.
I think is kind of cool.
Yeah. And I mean, there has to be a certain skill
Yes.
level
Yes.
there and the equipment and stuff, but there is, if they've got the basic, like, I'm the same way. I think an author knows their characters better than anyone
Hmm.
else. So I've done both. I've had one narrated by someone else because I wanted a female narrator, so I couldn't
Yeah.
do that myself. And then another one I've done, but then I've got on my series, I struggle because there's some accents that I want that I can't do justice to.
Yes.
And so I'm trying to, am I okay not having the accents because I don't want to try them and butcher them? So I'm just not sure yet if I'm ready to do those ones yet, but we'll see. Maybe I
And
will.
that's where I'm going to have the questions with Roche Good Books too, is there are some pretty strong accents and many of them are male point of view. I'm not male and I don't have the accent. So we'll see.
Yeah.
That's one of the advantages to waiting a little bit with doing these things is I'm not
Yeah.
rushing things out the door. I'm trying to make sure that when it is done right.
And the fact that it's a historical fiction, you're not like racing against contemporary technology for your book to be out of date.
Nope.
You're fine. you it's going to be history in 5 years and it's going to be history in 10
Yep.
years. So yeah, that's a fun thing to work out and to figure out and to find your space and your equipment and just get in that groove. It's challenging, but it's a lot of fun. So
That's awesome.
yeah, go for it, is what I would say.
All right.
Is with homeschooling and 8 kids and writing books, how do you juggle it all? I'm sure that's what people are wanting to know.
Everybody wants to know. Well, part of the advantage with homeschooling is that I get to set my own hours. I get to balance time the way my family needs me to balance the time. And if that means that I have a few
Yeah.
days where I get to write, then I take it. Or if I have a few days where I'm not writing because I have other things to do, then I do that too. But I've got the dedicated time that I get to spend with my writers group. I've got dedicated time that I get to spend in writing and in thinking and revising. And I'm learning how to juggle several different projects instead of just one story, one section of a story at a time, like just writing a draft all the way through from start to finish. Instead of just doing that, well, I can be working on that, but I can also be editing something else as I've got the time to do it. So being able to work with the time that I have, being able to work with the schedule and with the lifestyle that I have has been incredible, because you hear all the advice at writers conferences and from the popular books and things.
Yeah.
You need to write every day and you need to be doing X, Y, and Z every day. And you got to be a reader every day and things. And really, if it's something that I want to be doing and I love doing it, and it is something that is good for me to be doing, then I will make the time, whatever that time needs to look like.
And it's got to work for you and your family, or else it becomes a chore.
Yeah.
And so do you have any budding authors with your kids?
I might. Yep. I caught my 10-year-old writing her own story on my laptop.
That's awesome. You should get it published and give it to her as a gift or something.
She deleted it. She decided
Oh
she was
no.
done with it and
Oh,
deleted it. I was so mad.
Oh no. That would have been so cool if she could like physically hold her first book. Because that's such a great
It
feeling.
is.
one thing I've noticed, Renee, and I'm really impressed by is your sort of this confident sense that's coming from you about not stressing yourself out about how quickly you write or how quickly you release or whether or not you have it on audiobook or a lot of things that a lot of authors seem to struggle with. I'm just wondering, is that something that sort of comes inherently and sort of organically from you? Is that just part of your personality, or is this something you had to learn and teach yourself? And if so, sort of what helped you evolve into this sense of this is my story. I get to control when I write and when it comes out, and sort of just approach it with that confident sense of not letting the world force you to do something that you don't want to um, versus falling for that, right, and
Right.
feel like you're being forced, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, this is a question that I've actually had to, religious person, all the religious answers. I've had to spend a lot of time in prayer in order to understand
Right.
what in the world I'm doing with this. If I'm going to treat writing as something that I do and it consumes so much of my life and of my time, it's got to be worth it. And it has to make sense. It has to be done in a way that still lets me do everything else that I need to do. It has to fit within its sphere.
Yeah.
And so in trying to decide, well, how fast am I going to write? How important is it that I publish, every 6 months or every year, whatever the going rate is right now? It's a matter of prayer. And that for me, I think is where the confidence is coming from, is I already know that this isn't something that I'm going to have set up and running as a full-time business in the next 6 months. It's just not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that is intended to continue rolling even until after my kids have graduated from high school and moved on with life. If it takes till then
Yeah.
to actually build up a business with this, then that's what it does. And so those are the answers that have come to me. These are the answers that suit me. This is what is right for my family. And so I think that confidence is coming because I've asked for the revelation about it.
I love that, and it helps you to be authentic to you and what's important to you
Yes.
by following that. So that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. I see so many authors in groups who are panicking because they released their first book and in 30 days it's not a bestseller
Nope.
yet.
Right.
And yeah, and just this is a long game.
Yeah, it is.
It really is. You're playing a long game here, people, and even the most famous authors, we don't see all of the times they submitted their works, how many books they wrote, how many hours they wrote trying to find readers and agents and publishers.
Yep.
All we see is the book release, So being able to have that just confidence and comfort, and just calm, peace, that you're on the right track, you're doing what you're supposed to doing, and it's going to work. It's, it'll work out the way it's supposed to work out.
Yes, it will.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that is great. So throughout this entire journey for you, what has been your biggest challenge?
I think the biggest challenge has been having the patience with myself to be able to let the process happen as it will. For example, with the Roche Good Books, it took me a decade to actually get the first book done and written and published. But then after that, book 2 came out the next year, book 3 and 4 came out the year after that, book 5 and 6 came out the year after that. So within 4 years, I had all 4 books published, but it was after years and years of doing stuff. And now I'm diving into another series. Started as a standalone, turns out it's a whole series. Shocker to anybody who knows me.
Yeah.
I'm finding that the process is different. I thought I had a groove. I thought I knew what I was doing. I thought I knew the process that it was going to take in order to get now another story up and out. And it's been a week since I wrote anything. I've got nothing to show for any of this kind of writer stuff. And being able to hear other writers say, yeah, I took a break. Yeah, I got back to it after a while. Yeah, I did this thing and then I came back and it was fine again. And being able to hear that what I'm feeling is normal. where I'm
Mhm.
at in writing this new story is completely normal and natural. And of course, I'm in a stage with the draft of it where writing the first draft, writing the very first words on the page is not easy for me. There are people who love the
Yeah.
very first draft. I don't. I would so much rather be revising. So for me, it's hard. And being able to realize these things about myself and realize that it's okay to not look like I'm busy all the time, to not look like I'm doing all the things all the time. That's okay. For now, I can take a break,
Yeah.
and that's fine.
Yeah. That's awesome. I'm at a point where book 5 is going to be the last book, and I've written the first chapter because I always include the first chapter as a sneak peek in the previous book, but I just haven't gotten like, and it's not writer's block. I've got lots of ideas. I know where it's going to go. I think it's because it's the last book. I'm like, once I sit down and write it, I'm ending it.
Yeah.
That's, I think, and because I know once I start, like once I sit down and actually start typing, I'm like, it'll be done in no
Yes.
time. It'll just flow. But I think that's what it is. It's that I know internally that once I'm done, it's finished. That series is done, and that's, I don't, not scary is not the right word, but it's, I don't know, it's something.
I think I know the feeling. I don't like finishing things either. And I think that was where it was okay for me to finish the Roshka books because I already had another idea. It wasn't the end.
Yeah.
It was just the
Yeah.
next step in the process. I
Yeah.
know the feeling. I
Yeah.
don't like ends.
You got to make sure it's good as well. You don't want to be one of those who everyone hates the ending.
Yeah. Well, that's what beta readers are for.
Yeah, very true. Very true. All right. Well, do you have some recommendations for us or for our listeners for other clean authors that you
I
like?
do. Some of these are old authors that have been around forever, and some of them are, a couple of them are new. So Alexander Key, I read The Forgotten Door. I can always read The Forgotten Door. He has other stuff too, but I love it because it's so clean, and I love the questions that he raises about society and about life. Love that about his works. Charles de Lint, my favorite book ever is Charles de Lint's The Riddle of the Wren. And it's about this girl who flees an abusive relationship and turns out she's the lost princess of this forgotten realm type of thing. And it's so happy and peaceful. And I think he's a great example of taking something that's not good and doing it clean and doing it in a way that is actually productive and uplifting. Also Gordon Corman with the middle grade stories that he does. I read so many of his books, and I've even picked up several as an adult and still love them. They're fast-paced, they're clean, the attitudes of the kids are completely appropriate, at least as far as I remember. And even though bad things happen, there is good that follows it. The people, the characters figure out how to make it better. And so again, it's very uplifting. And then for the new ones, there's Emily Evermore, and she writes romance, specifically sweet romance, clean romance that way. I'm honestly not a big romance person, but that there are those stories is fantastic. Because a lot of people do. A lot of people really gravitate toward that romance genre. And then also Sophie Edwards, and she writes clean thriller stories, which is great. That's right up my alley, being able to see that fast pace and that action. And yes, there's bad stuff that happens, but we've still got the positive attitude. We've still got the uplifting. We've still got the bad circumstance, but hope that there is light at the end of the tunnel and a way to try to keep figuring out the different problems that come up.
Awesome. Those sound like some great recommendations. We'll have to check those out. And our readers, hopefully, if you haven't heard of those, our listeners, you'll go out and check them out and read those as well. So it is time for us to revisit the Two Truths and a Lie. So I'm going to read them again so that we remind everybody, we can remember. All right. Number 1, I wrote a story as a teen that became the basis for how I run my homeschool. Number 2, I write thrillers under the pen name Ren Harding. And number 3, I've had to change character names because my husband and I picked the same names for our babies. Okay, Brock.
All right. So These to me were hard because I could see them all being truths, to be honest with you. I feel like after talking to you for a little bit that you've been writing since you were young. I see a total opportunity for you to have written something that would have helped form how you would have homeschooled your kids. So I'm going to say that's a truth. And I'm going to say with 8 kids that it's likely that at some point you had to change character names because you were naming your kids. So I feel like that's truthful also. So I'm going to say the least one, the one that seems the least truth is going to be the thriller under a pen name. Although I assure you, I've not done any Google searches or haven't tried to look for a separate pen name for that. But I'm gonna make that the lie. That's my call, Marcus.
Okay.
Where are you
All
going?
right. So I can either agree with you, and if we're both right, I'm still behind, or I go out on a limb and choose something different to hopefully
and you
pull
get further
ahead.
behind.
Or I could
Yeah.
pull behind.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You'll be
or I could
behind
go
either way
further
is the
behind.
bottom line, Marcus. Yeah.
Ah, or I get it right and you get it wrong. That's the best case scenario. So
Unlikely,
let's
but
go with. I'm going to go with number 1. I wrote a story as a teen. That's the basis for the homeschool is the lie. Okay, so which one of us is wrong, right,
let's hear
or
it, Renee.
otherwise?
I do not have a pen name. So Brock got it right.
Ah, solid.
Hmm.
Yeah, I feel good about that.
Yeah. All right. Now you 2 up.
That's
We'll
all right.
get
It was a
we'll
good
I
get
guess.
back. We
appreciate
need,
that. It was a good guess, yeah. And even if you
yeah.
had to change that at the end to have me win, Renee, that'd be fine. You know,
All right. Well, you know what? We have
need.
a loophole here. You want to hear the loophole?
Okay.
I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So our 5th child, his middle name is Alexander. And at the time that I was writing the Roche Good books, I actually had a character named Alexander. I switched the last 2 letters to make it more French.
French, Alexandre.
Uh-huh. So there's the character name change. So technically the
Okay.
3rd one is still...
But that's not the one I picked,
No, it's
so
not.
it doesn't
I'm
help
sorry.
I love it.
We need a mascot that's like a scorekeeper. I'm going to find something. We can have an official scorekeeper. All right. Well, thank you, Renee, so much for being with us on the podcast today. We've had a lot of fun. It's been a great conversation. Listeners, thank you for being there. Please subscribe. Please share with your friends so that others can find more authors, get to know more authors of clean content, and we can spread the word. Thank you so much for listening or watching, and we will see you next time on the Clean Library Podcast.